Now that we know the areas of Africa, and of course the animals, it's important to know the seasons or times to go. Now before we start any of this, I must point out there is no good and bad time to go to Africa. High and low season doesn't equal good and bad, but I'll get back to that in just a second. Before we get started, sometimes I find it difficult to relate rainfall and weather charts just based off the information you're given, so it often helps to relate it to things you do know. For example, Cape Town is the same height as Melbourne. If you're looking at the two weather patterns, it's quite easy to know that if it's going to be rainy in Melbourne around about this time of year, it's going to be rainy in Cape Town around about that time of the year. Summer in Cape Town is beautiful, much like it is in Melbourne. In winter though, it's just as interesting as it is in Melbourne as well. Johannesburg is roughly the same height as Brisbane, so you can base the weather off that. And Victoria Falls is approximately the same as Darwin. Now this is really easy to remember and gives us an insight into the waterfall and the various areas around there. We all know Darwin has tropical thunderstorms over Christmas. Victoria Falls is very similar. Therefore, if somebody asks you, what's the best time of year to see Victoria Falls, and you can't remember right at the top of your head, just think about the weather. It'll rain January, February, which means the waterfall will be full March and April. Then as the year progresses, the waterfall will gradually shrink and it gets drier and drier until the next wet season comes. Once you base it off that, it's very, very easy to remember. Now, we did talk about high seasons and low seasons, and there's a definite high season in Africa. The high season in Africa is the same as the high season in Europe, for a few reasons. One, it's the high season of Europe, and people love to travel when they're on holidays. Number two, it's home to a few seasonal fluctuations. So for example, the Great Migration of Wildebeest, which we'll get into in just a minute, that happens during that high season, from roughly June, July to roughly October. Also, the Okavango Delta, the flooded desert we talked about a little bit as well. That floods to its maximum capacity, you guessed it, from June, July to roughly September, October. All of these seasonal things happen during that time of the year. Therefore, from June, July to September, October is the high season of Africa. There are a few other little exceptions to that. Cape Town, being nicer weather in the summer, will have a bit of a high season over Christmas. It's nicer weather, people like to travel during that time. Now in terms of good times and bad times, as I said before, there's no such thing. High season presents some amazing opportunities and amazing viewing, but also has its downsides. Low season has the upsides and downsides as well. So let's look at Kenya really closely. High season we talked about, the middle of the year, home to the Great Migration, where millions of animals are migrating across the plains. If you're there for the migration, you see an animal spectacle unlike anything else. However, it is more expensive and there are a lot more people around. Now if you go just before that, in the wet season, if you can imagine the migrating animals are there to eat grass, therefore it needs to rain for the grass to grow. So let's say April, that's the wet season, that's also the low season. Now people avoid this because it can be difficult to get around, it can be quite muddy, and it can rain during their holiday. However, it's the low season, it's cheaper, there's less people there, and there's also baby animals everywhere because they're giving birth before the migration comes through. What is important is that you go to the right place for the right amount of time with the right people, and that's what we're here to help you with.